Well, we are pleased to have our construction executive from our Des Moines office, Josh Miltenberger, join us in studio today. Josh's construction management experience is vast. Projects of all sizes he's worked on, including just renovations and interior renovations and new construction. Anything else I'm missing?
Oh, just the whole gambit. Bit of a jack of all trades.
Education, I think we had in there.
Education, healthcare, housing, office, kind of the whole gambit.
And which we're really lucky to have that because Josh for a while was employee number one and the one and only in Des Moines for about a year. And right when in 2020, right? When
yes,
COVID hit?
January of 20 is when we started the office, and which was great. And then March happened. So we all know what happened there. So 2020 looked a lot different than what I originally anticipated.
Yes. Josh, as we've been working together, I'm in awe of your pragmatic approach to everything that you do. Because you were our first employee in Des Moines, you wore several hats, as we just discussed, marketing, BD, sales, maybe even a little HR.
A little bit of everything. Yeah, if I needed to fill the coffee, take out the trash, like the whole thing, right? Yeah.
Project management, administrative, all that. As business and staff has grown, it's been fun to finally see you kind of hone in your executive role that you were supposed to have. So that's great. And are you feeling good about that?
It is. So my word of the year for 2021 was traction, really trying to gain what we had started in 2020 for the Des Moines market.
Yeah.
This year's momentum. And so we're taking the team that we built in 2021 and really seeing that come to full fruition right around Thanksgiving. And we're seeing just some amazing opportunity in 22 and beyond.
Which is awesome. And so basically because of all these efforts that Josh put forth in 2020, our office has grown to, I think, are we at 5 now?
We're at 5 now. Yes, we are. Yep, we have 3 in the office and 2 in the field and looking to add another in the field.
That is amazing. Well, you're here in studio today to talk a little bit about pre-construction. We'll go ahead and get started. So Josh, and we'll get to this, but I'm going to preempt the conversation. Josh once told me a story about actually talking himself out of work with a client. As we go through the questions, maybe we'll share that story. But talking yourself out of work is typically not something you do in our industry, and so stay tuned. You'll find out more. All right. So for any client that is working on a construction project, I think they should know, like, in your opinion, when is a good time to start pre-construction talks?
So it really is dependent upon the type of project that you have. If you're going to go in and you're going to be an office tenant in 3,000 square feet of space, really you're going to work with what's already there or some minor changes. You really know your needs. And so your pre-construction effort isn't heavy there. Where you get into a higher need for pre-construction services is when you have a more complex project, a larger scale project. If it's a new service, there's different pieces that you need to talk on, whether there's programming, where you're building the blocks of what you need, and then it's a concept, it's not even on a napkin yet, it's really an idea. So having that pre-construction on early at that point is absolutely critical. And so I would say when you're bringing on your design team, even a capital campaign team, if you're going to start fundraising, you want to have that contractor on board right at the same time, which is definitely different than what's been done in the past, traditionally.
You also mentioned design firms or design teams being involved in pre-construction. And it is typical that a company will hire a design firm to help them. But what happens is, I'm not trying to rag on design firms, but I think at times we have to design to a budget, right? And that can be difficult when it's just the design firm and the client, because you can have lots of wishes, right? So how do we hone those in? What do you offer to that client as they're going through that design process?
So the biggest value that I see in pre-construction are the questions that we ask and really listening into what are the needs of a client, what are the wants, and then what's the dream. And so the wants are what those things that we always want to go back to, that's an absolute. The wants are if we can, and then there's the dream, right? And that's generally when you're in that concept, that rendering kind of phase at the very start, you're dreaming. And so as a construction manager in a pre-construction process, we don't try to quash the dream, right? But we want to temper it to make sure that what's being drawn, what's being talked about aligns with the customer's ultimate goals. And because there's always a dollar amount, right? And so if there's something that's really important, we want to focus on making sure that that stays front and center, that we don't get deviated on something that really is distracting but is flashy, right? So it's staying true to the core principles of the project and then delivering beyond that.
Yep, I love that. You're exactly right. So speaking of cost and budget, I think every client wants to know, what does it cost to do pre-construction? Is there a cost?
So there's two different ways you can talk about the cost for pre-construction. So there's the time that we spend, right? And so a lot of times, if it's a quick hit, we're turning an estimate together. It's that simple space, that 3,000, 5,000 square foot build out. We don't have any costs associated with that. That's really just part of the services that we offer as a baseline. If you get into a more of a complex project where they're not ready to bring on a builder that's going to execute for them in the construction phase, we've been brought on as a consultant where we establish hourly rates, the hours needed. So we're treated more as a consultant, even like a design firm is in that early design phase. Oftentimes, if that project becomes a reality, we'll take, and as we're finalizing our contract structure, we'll blend that pre-construction, negotiate it, and blend it into our fee, and just come to an amicable solution. The other side of cost on that is, what's the cost if you don't do the pre-construction work? And so you go through the dreaming process with the architect and the design team, and you get caught up in the fun of designing your new space, right? And programming it and dreaming and what everything could be. And so you get all the way through the design, and then you bid out the project, and it comes in, 40% over budget. And so there's no way that you're going to get what's designed, what you've set your hopes on. And so there's the cost of time and also effort and energy. You're going to go back to the drawing board. You're going to redesign. You're going to have to rebid the work. And so just, if you don't do that pre-construction work, if you don't invest early with that additional partner, then you often can pay for it on the back end.
How do you approach pre-construction?
So, like I said earlier, I ask a lot of questions, and so really it's understanding the entire team's goal. So it's not just the owner, it's also the architect, and having that holistic approach rather than focusing on just one area. So as we ask those questions, it really gives us a baseline to what we need to work towards. And so there's different facets of pre-construction that really make it successful, but one that I'd like to touch on is the schedule side. And so a project has a timeline. So it has a start and has a finish. And let's just say, for example, for those that are watching, it's this long, right? So there's design is this long, construction is the other half. And so if you don't do a good job of managing your milestones during that pre-construction process, oftentimes it will lengthen, right? Decisions aren't made, either deliverables aren't hit, or decisions aren't made by the design team or the owner or another entity if you're waiting on something from a municipality. So that grows the pre-construction side, the design side, where your finish date often doesn't change. And so what that does is it impacts your overall duration for construction, which then impacts your cost for construction. So if you're going to accelerate your schedule, you have to pay for that, whether that's for materials or for labor. So it's really, you're wanting to hold the whole team accountable, which includes both our internal resources that we have during design and that pre-construction process, but also holding the other team members accountable. It's kind of steering the ship.
And I mean, it might cost more if they still want to push that schedule, but at least then they're aware of it, and they might want to spend the client might want to spend the money to make it happen. And we talked about that restaurant and where they wanted to be open, making money, making cinnamon rolls, and so I get it. And same with, I think we're finding that too in healthcare with hospital beds of, they're willing to pay for the money because they can make more money. So it's
there's a value for that date. It's just understanding, again, is that worth it to the client or not? And then you focus your energy in those locations. Yep.
We kind of talked about, I guess we're kind of leaning or going towards the topic of surprises or not having surprises. So would you agree pre-construction really eliminates any uncertainties or any unknowns?
I think if you do it well, it does.
Yeah.
And so anyone can say, yeah, we do pre-construction, right? I mean, everybody can do anything in this day and age. And so I think if you want to do it well, it's those clear lines of communication, setting those expectations, and then really the follow-up. And so how many of our clients do it once? So they don't understand the vernacular. So we speak in acronyms all the time. So take a step back, listen, and really understand where they're at, reinforce that. Even to us, it might seem really simple and mundane, but to our clients that haven't done it before, it's really important that you have that clear articulation, the clear expectation, and everybody walks away at the end of the day saying, yeah, I understand what we're doing, and I agree with what we're doing. And so at any point, someone can raise their hand and say, stop, I have a question, I don't understand, help me understand, and just have that aptitude or that scenario of trust. Okay, so if you build that trust and you can have that honest, authentic conversation, I think that's absolutely critical to successful pre-construction.
Okay, so that you brought up trust and that relationship, so I think this is a perfect segue to talk and give an explanation about how you talked yourself out of work. And in fact, yes, we maybe aren't going to be working on this project now, but how it is going to benefit us in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get calls a lot from brokers and potential clients that are looking at spaces. And so got a call last summer, and they wanted to walk through. It was about 4,000 square feet of space, had been built out about 3 years ago. So it was still really new, really fresh. And walking through with the client, they had a floor plan where they had marked up the existing space. And we're talking about some scope changes that they needed. They were trying to get to a certain number of seats and desks. And it was going to be probably $75,000 worth of workforce, which is a nice TI.
I mean, 4,000 square feet in a space that's already in good condition.
Yeah, so it was a nice little job. Not a lot of money to you and I, but it's important to that client. They're trying to meet a programmatic need. So as we're walking and I'm talking with the broker, talking with the client, trying to get an understanding of what was really important to them, I started doing a count on the existing space. And so we just repurposed one of the rooms, and it got them the seats that they needed. And so literally over the course of about 25 minutes walking through the space, we went from having a $75,000 project to no project, which quite honestly was okay with me because our revenue is going to come, our relationships are going to come. We want to make sure that our team is providing the best value. And so that best value to that client was using that space as it was. As it turns out, that got back to the building owner. And he owns a half a dozen buildings in the metro area, and we've been doing work for him ever since. And so we built a relationship with that owner without ever having met him. And just because of the way that we approached the work, the way that we communicated, and it's turned out to be a win-win for everyone.
I love that. See the big picture, you know that how it's going to benefit you in the future. The broker was probably doing the happy dance because he got the deal done. And then the building owner's pumped because they have a new lease. And we know that sometimes those are hard to come by these days.
Yep,
and then,
absolutely.
And then the business owner didn't have to spend any additional money. Yeah. So you got a gold star for that.
That's right. So I mentioned the $75,000. So you look at these small businesses and $100,000 TI, really, that's not a lot of money to us because of what we do every single day. But if you look at a small business owner that's moving into a space, that's $75,000, $100,000 of money that they're putting into their space isn't necessarily really going back into their business as far as their employee training, product development, whatever that is. You need a space to work in. I'm not taking away from that because I don't want to take away all of our work, but it's hard for those clients to part way with that money because they, as an owner, and I come from a farm, so I understand the mechanics of cash flow and what's important to grow the business and build that business. And getting that relationship built based on that conversation it was a win.
That's awesome. I love how you throw in working on a farm into it because I feel like in Des Moines, does everyone work on a farm, grow up living on a farm?
So a lot of us in the construction industry have. That's just the nature of, you're either going to stay on the farm or you're going to construction. I fit the stereotype. Yeah.
I love it. Let's bounce over to more the cost side of things. So let's talk about value engineering and how does that play out through pre-construction? And for people out there who maybe don't know what value engineering is, can you just touch on that too?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So let's say we go in, we budget a project, and it comes in 20% over. And so you go through a process called value engineering. And that's not just cutting costs. So that's it's a completely different conversation. Value engineering is lowering your costs while still providing the same programmatic use or performance. And so the owner is getting the same function of their space by doing it differently.
Yeah, like they maybe want solid surface countertops, but you know what? They're going to have to go with laminate.
You're gonna have to go, yeah, exactly. So you still have the countertop. It still is durable because you can get different grades of plastic laminate, but it's not gonna be the high end of what they hoped for. And so those are different options. And usually you're not looking at different paint colors. That doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Generally your carpet color or even the carpet material, you're not making big changes. And so you're looking at systems, you're looking at mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. How can we do it more efficiently? It's holistic, and so it's not any one part. And so that value engineering process is really key to, again, understand the expectation, and a client might not understand that variation in the mechanical system, where it might be a cheaper install up front, but longer term, your life cycle cost is going to be higher because it's not as efficient. And so, again, it's weighing those different things out. Now, if a project comes in 50% over budget, it's really challenging to VE out 50%, right?
It's not okay.
And so really that you're talking holistic scope changes where you might, if you're building a ground up building, you decrease that footprint size or you take a floor off, but you allow for that expansion for the future. So you give that flexibility. So again, you're trying to meet the client where they need to be. And that can be a challenge.
It can be a huge challenge. You also talked maybe a phased approach, maybe not necessarily in new construction, but in maybe interiors. If you do something 1 year, what are your needs right now, and then.
Yep, exactly. I mean, you can look at it even at a furniture you've So if you've got we're going to have a spot for 24 workers, only put in, and you only have 10 employees right now, we'll put in 16 spots for people to work, and that last third, those last 8 spaces can come at a later date. And so it's a different way to approach it from a cash flow perspective.
How do you look into the future for construction and pricing trends? Like, so when a client is coming to you for help, and they're like, what does this look like a year from now? How do you predict the future? Do you go into a
So I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have that little magic 8 ball that we had as kids and like shake it in the room. That doesn't work. It's really just been volatile, to be frank. And so from a material perspective and from a labor perspective, it's just really challenging to forecast out because the data that we have over the last 10 years doesn't really apply to what we've experienced the last 2 years. And so it's really advising them what it costs now and giving a range of what that escalation might look like.
Yeah.
We've seen materials level off in certain areas, but other areas have still been volatile. The other part is actually the availability of manpower, the availability of materials, as we've seen supply chain issues just really across the board, whether that's mechanical systems, roofing systems. We've had to switch roofing types because we couldn't get the mastic for one part of the roof. Like we could have the entire assembly, but there's these little glue pucks that we weren't able to get.
Yeah.
And so it's small stuff like that that's never been a problem before. So it's really unprecedented.
Right.
And quite honestly, owners are pretty understandable because they've seen the impact in other avenues of their business. And it's not a secret right now that it's a challenge. And so you forecast to the best of your ability. You say, if you buy it now, this is the price. We've seen this kind of price change over the last 12 months. This is what it could be in the next 12 months, but it's really the historical escalation factors that we have don't trend well moving forward.
Right.
And so it's really just making sure that they understand that, and you can put a number to it, but you always have to verify that number.
Right. So kind of what I'm hearing is construction material pricing is volatile, but then also that you need pre-construction more than ever, right? To get people to understand that where we're at. Right?
Absolutely. And again, it's asking the right questions. What are the big pieces of it? And then is there a different way that we can approach your project? And so if you look at a warehouse, and so right now in our market, the industrial market is just absolutely red hot.
Yep.
So we have data centers, we have distribution, and so it's very strong in that sense. And so traditionally, precast wall panels are a standard for those warehouses. Well, there's a primary distributor of precast wall panels in the Des Moines market. Does a great job, very cost competitive, but limited bed space because you're not going to increase your plant size just for a stint of years, right? And so there's opportunities to look at other options. Tilt-up precast is a system that's not been widely used in central Iowa for a number of years, but has an option of coming back to where you're casting those wall panels on site and then tilting them up. So again, getting a very, very similar product, but getting it in a different way. And so those are the creative things that we're having to try to figure out as we move forward.
So leave it to construction to go back to an older way of doing things first. I mean,
there's other new things. I mean,
Okay.
we're seeing a lot more prefabrication where you're coming out and being very sophisticated in that way. The tilt-up wall panels, they're not unsophisticated. It's just a
different way of doing it.
simple way of doing it. And so there's been a lot of different assets or different facets that we are trying to do on the pre-con side, getting smarter with how we build, because we've talked a lot about material, but labor is going to be a big challenge coming up. Ever since I've come into the construction market, and we're coming closer to 20 years, not quite there yet, but it's always right. So we have this labor shortage that is coming up for carpenters, for laborers, for sheet metal workers, and so we're going to have to figure out different ways to build. And a lot of that has to do with prefabrication off-site. We were just talking about it at lunch today about doors. And so on a project that I managed a few years ago, we put all of the door hardware on at the door supplier's shop. And so our carpenters in the field didn't have to do it. And so it lessened the work on site and kept it in a controlled environment when it was being built. And so we're having to be more creative with how we do the work.
That's a really good example. That's amazing. And if you thought of that, good job. Can you take credit for that?
I can't take credit. We had another PM on the team that managed it, did a great job with it. We as a team reviewed it and agreed to move forward with it because it was something that was new at the time.
Very that can be time consuming. You'll probably save a lot of time. All right, to wrap things up, 3 key things that people need to know about pre-construction.
So there are 3 key components to successful pre-construction. So there's the cost management, which we've talked on, the scope management, and the schedule management. And so really, the first one is that schedule management. So it's managing those milestones, and that's really important that we're hitting the deliverable dates. So those early questions, if you're doing town hall meetings, program discussions, or design deliverables, whether that's a schematic design of documents or just a narrative talking about the project. After that, the owner has to make a decision. And so part of that has to do with our costing. And so it's having accurate costing with the level of information that we have, and then just the delivery dates of those things. That way that your period that you've allowed for design and programming and costing all stays set. You're not eking into that construction side of things. The scope management then is very important because we've all seen it in the industry. You have a set of documents, and it just seems like there's more things in there than what we talked about. So it's really having that clear delineation between what's in the drawings, what's in the scope, because at our schematic pricing, I can guarantee that not everything's on the drawings that we have in our scope. And just making sure that those two align with each other, so our scope and the documents, but then also the owner's expectations.
I have to stop you because I can't tell you how perfect that is to lead into. This is going to be a little bit salesy for a minute, but Spencer made a note of this. He wanted to make sure to note how accurate Greiner is to the final product. So how accurate we are from a DD set to CDs. And he said that our pre-con team, our estimating team, is always within 1.8%.
Yeah, and that's phenomenal. Yep.
Yeah. So I just had to brag.
No, absolutely. We've got a great team doing that.
Yeah. That'll be my one plug. Okay.
Perfect.
Go. Sorry.
No, that's great. And so really, if you're managing your schedule well, providing that good cost data throughout, and then managing the scope expectations, those 3 things really lead to a successful pre-construction process.
Yeah.
If you have one of those fall off, then the wheels are off, and you're going to have a disconnect between the team members that are involved. And that's really what we want to try to avoid.
Yeah, I was going to say, you never want to have that at the end of the job. Well, awesome. Josh, I think that is about it, unless you want to have anything else to add.
No, pre-construction is my favorite part of what we do. It's just, it's fun to really grasp what an owner is looking for and ask the questions, have them understand what that is, and see it come to fruition. The favorite example I have since I've been at Greiner is that we met with an owner of a body shop. It was an atypical project for us, but she was having some challenges getting good information from in the construction market. And so we had a meeting and just listened to her talk, and we had to move her front entrance and her wash bay door from the west elevation to the south elevation. So that took her off the streetscape. So she was super concerned that she wasn't going to have this main entrance visible to the traffic because she does get a fair amount of drive-by traffic. And so hearing that, we partnered with a local architecture firm, and I had a conversation with Tom and said, Tom, I want you to work your architecture magic. I want you to take out that trace paper that we all love and your black Sharpie, and I want you to squiggle some lines on it and give some options for what her space could look like. Because they can do it in the computer now, but I think it's more authentic if it's actually on the trace paper. It's
that might be the
school,
20-year construction experience.
Yeah, exactly.
But I love it. Okay.
And so we met with her and walked her through 3 or 4 different options that really focused on that. And we were the only builder on the pursuit side. So this is before there's any documents. We had a napkin sketch that we were basing all of our pricing off of. And that meeting with her with the options is what won us the project. We weren't the low contractor, we weren't the high contractor for our budget, but we best understood her concerns and her needs for the project, and that's what's got us the work. So that's my favorite story since I've started with Greiner.
She, you listened. She needed you to listen, and she needed us at that moment, so that's awesome. And how did the project turn out?
We're in the throes of construction right now, and so it got delayed a little bit last year, just working through some things with the city, but what's amazing is that the final product is very close to that hand sketch that we did just under a year ago.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks again for making the trek from Des Moines all the way to our Minneapolis studio.
It's a short drive.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll let you try to get out before traffic gets bad. But thank you so much for your time,
Absolutely.
and we'll see you soon.
Sounds great.